This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. And what I'm looking at today is 2024's Salem's Lot, directed by Gary Dauberman. When I first heard that they were remaking Salem's Lot, my biggest question was, why are they remaking Salem's Lot? Keep in mind, there was a version of Salem's Lot directed by Tobe Hooper from 1979. It's pretty good. I enjoyed it. There was a version of Salem's Lot from 2004 directed by Michael Salem. Even better by my reckoning. I enjoyed it a lot. So now there's a third version of Salem's Lot. Once again, why does this movie need to exist? Now let's be clear. There are plenty of Stephen King adaptations that suck. Remake Maximum Overdrive. Remake The Tommyknockers. Remake The Langoliers, which is better than you might think, by the way. The story is kind of interesting. The movie itself looks really cheap, though there's some nice model work in it that I don't think gets enough credit. But on the whole, not a great movie. So there are lots of Stephen King movies that you can remake without going to the well of Salem's Lot again and again and again. So before I even watched this movie, I was frustrated with this movie, sight unseen. What I always try to tell people online is that movies and the novels they're sometimes based upon are two entirely different things. You should not go into a movie version of a novel expecting the novel. A novel can have hundreds, thousands of pages, and they can do anything within those pages because they rely entirely upon the imagination of the reader to interpret the words. The movie is another matter entirely. Typically, you don't want to run any longer than 2 hours, and that's pressing it. And while you can create anything with the special effects we have these days, the point is it costs money to do. And so you're not going to blow out your budget on special effects, hopefully. So that limits your options. Never mind, novels oftentimes have characters that in a movie wouldn't quite work. So they may be gotten rid of entirely or combined with other characters. So they're not the same things. I wish people would get over this notion that when they go to a movie, they're going to see their favorite book on the screen. You might see pieces of it, but you are not going to see your favorite novel. It is not going to happen. Now the thing about the 2004 version of Salem's Lot is that it has to work particularly hard to differentiate itself from the prior versions. And it does, but unfortunately a lot of times, by my reckoning at any rate, the differences were differences because of difference. They weren't necessarily different because the narrative needed them to change. They were different because the filmmaker, Gary Dauberman, likely thought that if they were to make it the same, then what's the point? And that's very valid logic. What is the point if you're going to just duplicate what came before? So there are changes in the 2024 version that separate it from the prior two versions. But once again, there are changes that seem to be there for the change and nothing else. So it doesn't make sense. I was reading an interview of Gary Dauberman, the director as well as the screenplay writer for this version of Salem's Lot, and he said something to the effect that there was at least 3 hours of footage which he had to cut down. Now the thing is, my question would have to be, why did he need to cut it down? Why not make his version of Salem's Lot a miniseries consisting of 2 hour-and-a-half episodes? That way you can incorporate as much footage as you can. One of the greatest problems with this version of Salem's Lot is that it appears very compressed, very truncated, and characters do things that the narrative doesn't lay the groundwork for. For instance, in this version, Miniseries is played by Louis Pullman, who seems like a fine actor. But The reason he returns to Salem's Lot is really odd. He seems as a person lost and trying to find his way in the world. And that's fine if you surround him with stronger characters, narratively speaking, that can help guide him on his way and help make his journey a fruitful one. Instead, he's surrounded by equally weak characters in terms of why they do things and their motivation. And it's just kind of odd. No one really clicks. It's particularly hard to do a scary movie when you can't relate to the characters. You don't care about them, in other words. So what happens to them is equally meaningless because it just doesn't matter. And that's the feeling I got from Lewis Pullman's interpretation of Ben Mears. His version was too unfocused, as if he were just drifting through life. He didn't really have a reason to be in Salem's Lot. It's actually named Jerusalem's Lot, shortened to Salem's Lot, likely due to a connection with evil and witchcraft and so on. Though as I was saying, other than having grown up in Salem's Lot, he has no reason to be there, and you can feel this ennui around the character, and he just feels pointless. This is in contrast to Ben Mears as played by Rob Lowe in the 2004 version, who had a purpose for returning to Salem's Lot, whose life was very much affected in a bad way by what happened to him when he lived in this town. For him, the return was bittersweet, but it made sense. Never mind, Rob Lowe is a really good actor. Another example of this tendency is Matt Burke, who's played by Bill Camp in the 2024 version, and Andre Braugher in the 2004 version. Once again, Andre Braugher is an excellent actor, and his performance brings out all sorts of subtext and nuance, though most importantly, the 2004 version very much establishes why Matt Burke would have called Ben Mears when he believed that there was a vampire in his house. It made sense because they spent the time to show us who these people are. Never mind having great actors playing them. The story took place over 2 nights. So therefore, it gave you time to learn who these people are. And it worked mainly for that reason. The 2024 version, not so much. Though unfortunately, the director's approach to his character does him no favors. Like with the 2004 version, he meets Ben Mears. But the nature of the relationship, because once again, everything feels compressed, they don't really connect on any level. So when Bill Camp's Matt Burke calls Ben because he saw a vampire in his house, I just asked myself, why is he calling him? He's met him once, seems to have no real relationship with him, so why would he do that? And this is something that happens throughout the 2024 movie. Characters do things because movie. You're not given enough information about them for their actions to make sense. And another thing about the 2004 miniseries, once again consisting of 2 episodes, it had time to breathe. The feeling of this small town and all the intrigues and things that they did felt very real and alive. And the town itself, as well as its inhabitants, became characters in 2004 miniseries. The 2024, not so much. Once again, because the series doesn't invest the time to build these characters, to build the world that they live in. So when I wasn't wondering why people are doing whatever, because they don't know each other, and they shouldn't be acting like this. It makes no sense. It's not something humans tend to do. I couldn't distract myself with a vibrant small town with all these interesting people, because the town wasn't particularly vibrant and the people not particularly interesting. Though what I think I can say with confidence is that Gary Dalberman really liked the vampires, because he really gets in there really quickly, which under normal circumstances would be fine, except once again, you're not establishing anything. So when these vampires appear, I kind of shrugged, because nothing feels invested in. Nothing really feels like the director and screenwriter had created this with a sense of vitality, a sense of caring about these people. It feels very run-of-the-mill and just very odd and pointless. Another thing I should mention is that apparently Matt Burke is really into vampires. He knows all sorts of lore and stuff. And the first thing that popped up in my head was that, why does he know this? Why is this so interesting to him? The movie never establishes that. So when the vampires start to attack, and when he himself is attacked, he has all this information, and he's so knowledgeable. But it's never established why he's knowledgeable. I get the feeling that, remember I said earlier that there was at least 3 hours of footage here? I get the feeling that this was cut to the bone. And part of what went under the axe was characters' reasons for doing what they did. I didn't understand at all why, and this is once again not the only instance of this happening. It's very frustrating to watch. It's not bad in that it is watchable. It's not terrible. It's well shot. It's gorgeous to look at times. But it still is so distracting to have so many crucial details, small in some instances, but crucial nonetheless, overlooked. And I mentioned earlier about there being no movie exactly like the novel, which may happen to spawn it. 100% the case. But the thing is, it doesn't have to be. I've read Salem's Lot decades ago. I don't remember it because, frankly, it wasn't that memorable to me. But all it's needed to do is to take the more interesting elements of that novel and fill in the blanks with good storytelling. It doesn't have to be an exact copy, because it can't, of the novel, but at least tell a good story. And that's where the 2024 version of Salem's Lot is perhaps the weakest. Which is to say, there are vampires that, while not immune to sunlight, can only be harmed by direct sunlight. Now understand what I'm saying here. I'm saying that vampires can walk around during the day, apparently as much as they like, as long as they're in the shade and out of direct sunlight. This upending of vampire lore is ridiculous, though I understand why Gary Dalberman did it. He sets up this huge set piece at the finale of the movie, where the vampires are hiding during the day in the trunks of cars parked at a drive-in. Now, this seems to be clearly done for the purpose of the set piece, as well as to differentiate it from the other two miniseries, because it makes no sense. People have houses. Houses tend to have basements. Why are they not in basements? Why are they in the trunks of cars in the middle of a field? And speaking of that particular scene, how did those cars get to that field? The movie establishes that one person is loyal to Barlow, the head vampire, the Nosferatu, if you will. And is it implying she drove all these cars? Once again, it makes no sense. Though, what makes even less sense is the idea that these vampires, when the sun is not directly shining on them, can just go about their day. It breaks vampire lore in a very unsatisfying way, and the worst thing of it is, it didn't have to do it. It could have been clever. Check out Midnight Mass on Netflix as to ways that vampires can hide from the sun if they really were desperate and wanted to make that happen. But in this case, the trunks of cars things is just so dumb. And that's one of the biggest problems with it. Instead of trying to work within the boundaries of vampire lore, it breaks them because it's apparently just convenient. I'll be honest, I didn't go into this version of Salem's Lot expecting it to be great. Because, once again, there's no reason for it to exist in the first place. That being said, I didn't expect it to feel so rushed and compressed and just uninvolving. It's not particularly scary. It's not terribly interesting. There are moments that are fine on the whole, and as I mentioned earlier, it looks good. It's well shot. And there's some interesting camera moves in it as well. But it's just not worth the time. If you're really interested in Salem sci, check out the 1979 version. Though, I would point you towards a 2004 version, which, as I said, I think is better. But what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com, trailer into reaction. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a thumb.